For part 5 of our top 75 albums of 2023, we start to touch upon what I would consider variously elite releases of thrash, black, and death metal, as well as transcendent releases, things that went beyond the norm but held on to the traditions of their subgenre. And some of them were just kind of killer works of death or death metal art, and I would include Mortual's Evil Incarnation among those, a sort of random Costa Rican death metal quartet's demo tape, or now CD and LP and all that, which is, to me, it reads as the style of South American extreme death metal, and it is certainly on the brutal side in some aspects, but not mindlessly. There's a thrashing sort of like mid-2000s Mortem feeling to it, like Massacre's debut album, Sacro, has that same kind of style where it's brutal, but it's got big grooves to it. It's got a thrashing, traditional death metal feel to it, but it's not exactly full-on atmospheric death metal or cavern core or something like that. So it's just riff after riff. There's kind of nothing more to say about it. It's a fairly short release, and I'm looking forward to see what they do next. Just very much something that is within my taste for this style, and something that stuck with me for countless listens. So there's a long tradition of German black metal taking a lot of influence from Dissection and the Swedish melodic black death metal movement in general, and Hallowed's debut full-length album, Awaken the Black Flame, very much feels like a classic pulled from the late 90s in that style. If you look to a record like Black Horizon's debut, this has that feeling in some ways, but this is certainly a modern black metal record in the underground sense, where it is very atmospheric in its generation. It is not obsessed with precision, and it's not that interested in death metal movements at all. So this is very much a melodic black metal release that is unsentimental, a little bit chaotic at times, and very much focused on the classic feeling of maybe more Storm of the Lightsbane level energies. And overall, I think that it was something that I felt was fairly standard when I approached it and reviewed it in short. And then once I spent more time with it and returned to it, it became kind of an addictive thing. It was the thing that I reached for quite often, and might surprise some people that I put it this high on the list, but there is something kind of special about this record if you give it a chance to sink in a bit more and spend time with it. At number 33, we have Chakma's On Tenebrous Wings. This is a Norwegian thrash metal trio who very much take influence from the classic German thrash metal canon and black thrash metal canon for a fairly traditional thrash metal record, very much related to what Necromantheon and Inculter have been doing of late. So they kind of fit in with their compatriots, but they give it their own focus and their own there's a bit of more Sodom in this record than I would have expected. I think kind of around the time that the Nuclear Winter came out and that whole record, it's not about groove, but it's about racing through big riffs, and I think this record was entirely underrated for what it was this year, because it's fairly straightforward, and I think that I just appreciate a very straightforward evil thrash metal record more than a lot of people. There's no gimmick, there's nothing corny about this record. It's just a great cutting riff record, and I could leave it on repeat for hours and hours and still hang with it all day.
God is a allegiance to fire, following the calling of the down. God into the eternal fire. Necromancer,
Thusia's Islands in Cosmic Darkness is number 32. And I think because it just generated this atmosphere and these waves of riffs that I just felt like could go on forever. I think this is a very talented band in terms of composition and letting things linger and move and create this feeling that we certainly get from bands like Negative Plane on their earlier releases, as well as Cult des Ghouls. But I believe they were aiming for more of a Hellenic black metal record with sort of an echoing sound to it. And well, that's the result we get anyway. But this was entirely underrated for what it was. I'm not sure why people didn't quite pick up on it as much as I did, but it was an intense rhythmic experience, to say the least. But a record that both survives and drowns in its riffs, and I think in the best way, because it's not too soaked in reverb that I can't read it, but it's they pull it back to a minimalism which feels ancient, and so I got the right feeling from it in terms of being a fan of a certain type of black metal, and I feel like they nailed it. I'd like to see what they could do for a second record, and maybe avoid the bells and whistles one might expect from that. Lost in an Eternal Silence is the debut full-length album from Blood Oath, a Chilean progressive death thrash metal quartet, and a band I've covered a bit for their first EP back in the day. Now, it's at number 32 because it was raw, old school, song-oriented, had plenty of technique, and had a sort of rugged, classic, real feeling to its production values, and it just felt like the genuine article. I think they've nailed that sound and kind of made it their own in a way that feels like they're leagues beyond what they were doing before. It's a huge leap in their style, and we could probably conceivably put them next to bands like Suppression and Miscreants in terms of having a little bit of the ancient atheist style in their work, but also kind of doing their own thing that's a little bit heavier and thrashing in other ways. So, well worth checking out if you missed it. It is an underground death metal record in truth, and it's not going to be polished and pretty as you might expect. Number 30 is Outlaws Reaching for Asaya. This is a black metal band that had been around for a while. I think the fellow who leads it is from Brazil, but now based in Europe in general, moving around here and there. And this is a melodic black metal record, but not a one that is strictly assigned to the old school ways of playing from the early to mid 90s. In fact, there's a lot of very modern things about this record that help keep it interesting, and dramatic presentation is one of them. There's a couple of very inspired pieces on here which are very focused on the riff, and there's other pieces which are more focused on movements and bigger motions, and I found this was the sort of record where it convinced me over time of where it was going, and it stuck in my head for those big riffs that they pulled here and there. So I spent quite a lot of time with it, and found it was worth coming back to several times throughout the year. Number 29 is Hallucinates from the Bowels of the Earth. This is a avant-garde or psychedelic death metal band who aren't that avant-garde, but they certainly do approach elements of psychedelic rock in the same way that bands like Morbus Chron and Cadaveric Fumes do. That shouldn't suggest that there is any sort of post-metal or particularly sentimental movements on this record, but there are psychedelic feeling and abstract moments which stretch out into the realm of what I would consider psychedelic rock flotation devices. They sort of worm out into tangents that pull back in a way that progressive metal has been doing for a long time. But here, they're still very much linked into classic death metal forms. They have riffs and they have a certain attack that keeps it running through and moving in a way which is probably more aggressive than even a record like Sweven. So, worth checking this out if you hadn't noticed it before. And yeah, just something in this style which we don't hear much of very often. At number 28, we have Deranged from Hyperdontia, and this is probably the best set of riffs from this band to date. This is just a great record. It's just an EP with, I think, 4 or 5 songs. It's a 12-inch record. It's fantastic front to back. Every note, every riff they hit is just perfect. It's I wish they'd put out a full length in this style and sound, this is not that removed from what they were doing before, but this is just a great record. It just it stabbed me in the neck every time I picked it up. It's solid sort of intensity and brutality of it. There's a very clean and classic cut to the render and all that, and it just feels like pure old school death metal done at just a very elite level of riffcraft, and it's just something that I couldn't stop coming back to it from the first time I heard it. So a lot of enthusiasm for me around this record. So I was going to put Inculter's Morbid Origin higher on this list. I think that it's a very fine example of classic thrash metal done in modern times. It is the exact right way to do it. It is tuneful, well written, not too derivative, and they're doing their own thing here while still resembling the best of Necromanthean. I would say Critical Defiance do an equally strong job of it on their first record. And overall, we get a huge leap in vision and quality from Inculture on this record. And I think that the only thing that pushes it down on this list is that there were so many things I spent more time with. I only had about 3 or 4 weeks with this record overall before I wrote this. And I didn't want recency bias to entirely shove it up to the top of the list, even though I do think it's a very high quality record. I'm still yet to see exactly how it's going to last with me and in mind. So I haven't even gotten the vinyl yet, so we'll see at a later time how it stuck around with me. A Dialogue with the Eerius Sublime is the second full-length album from Italy-based Vertebra Atlantis. It sits at number 26 because it is a fantastic example of how sort of black metal and death metal can sit in awkward positions and find new angles at every gesture. I think there's something both illustrative of scene that happens within each of these pieces that takes us in a progression of the story told in the lyrics, but also they're all captivating in a similarly consistent form, where we move from the first half and it's more aggressively black metal focused sounds into some more death metal sounds, and then the end of the record is something entirely different, which you kind of just have to experience. It was something that was very memorable when it first hit, and I think once I got a grasp of what the entire record was all about, it isn't impenetrable in its depth, but there's at least an experience created here that is of a very high standard, and it, the riffs count and all that too. So there's a lot to experience here, which is not it's not just playing around. They've got a very clear direction of what this album is presenting, and I thought that that was to an impressive standard, and it was above and beyond their first record.